Hi, everybody, and welcome to At Risk International's weekly Intelligence Insights brief. I'm Ross Hill, Director of Intelligence for the Global Risk Intelligence team, and joining me today are Protective Intelligence Analysts Cooper McGill and Roman Fisher. And to start us off today, Roman is going to talk about the increasing food prices and risk of civil unrest.
Thank you, Ross. Historically, higher food prices have contributed to civil unrest, the French Revolution and the Arab Spring being examples commonly used. More recently, civil unrest due to, at least in part, to rising food prices has been seen in Lebanon, Sudan, Cuba, and South Africa. The UN's Food and Agricultural Organization's Food Price Index rose again in March, and now is at the highest level it's been since the program began in 1990. Civil unrest caused by unaffordable food occurs when a nation's people expect their government to effectively control rising prices. When the government underperforms or its policies are ineffective, combined with limited social safety nets and weak currencies, citizens can easily become politically and economically disgruntled. This is the contributing factor to what can instigate civil unrest. The war in Ukraine has severely worsened existing supply chain problems, rising inflation, and record debt caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The World Food Program has estimated that an additional 47 million people will become acutely food insecure in 2022, a 17% increase from pre-war baseline of 276 million people. Countries that receive a majority of their wheat from Russia and Ukraine, such as Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, Pakistan, several others, are likely to be severely affected by rising costs. Poorer nations across the globe, like those in Latin America and Africa, are likely to suffer from the effects of higher food prices more compared to wealthier nations such as the United States. In some poor countries, food costs can take up to 60% of a person's income. In contrast, Americans spend between 6 and 13% of their income on food. Food prices were expected to begin to recover in 2020 from the global pandemic. However, the war in Ukraine has changed predictions. Food prices are being expected to remain high, and therefore prolonging stressors that can lead to civil unrest. Finally, the rate of inflation is at the highest level since 1981 here in the U.S. This, in combination with rising food and fuel prices, some experts are warning crime rates will continue to climb. The most likely types of crime to increase are thefts and burglaries. And in Canada, there is some anecdotal evidence, creating estimates showing shoplifting of food items has increased by 25 to 40% just in the last 6 months. And that is what I have for you. Ross?
Thanks, Roman. Next, Cooper will take us through some of the cybersecurity risks linked to the Ukraine conflict.
Hi there. So starting off here, we have gotten a warning recently from the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which is made up of the United States, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK. This warning is specifically regarding Russian cyber attacks against critical infrastructure here in the United States, but obviously around the world as well. And this comes on the heels of several other advisories that have been issued in recent months. The threat comes now from both the Russian government as well as cybercrime groups operating in Russia. Several groups have pledged their support to the Russian government and to support them in operations. There's some possible triggers for activity by these groups. One, any cyber offensives initiated against Russia However, there is also the potential for any countries providing material support to Ukraine to be specifically targeted by these groups. Additionally, the risks will also likely increase as Russia's economic burden continues to grow due to sanctions and other economic restrictions. It's quite possible that retaliatory attacks may be conducted. Similarly, the FBI issued an alert specifically to the food and agriculture sector regarding cyber attacks. In this case, more closely was discussing ransomware and ransomware groups just being more likely to act during key planting and harvesting seasons. Obviously, this can have a negative impact on supply chain and negative economic toll. These attacks are obviously always ongoing, across the entirety of the food and agriculture sector, as well as all critical infrastructure sectors. However, the recent increase in several attacks that were noted occurring during key seasons has been notable due to the time-sensitive nature of the work of some of these organizations within food and agriculture. Some of these companies are seen as with a significantly higher likelihood of paying the ransom in order to continue operations. So, thus this targeting during key seasons, these threat actors likely believe that further increases their odds of receiving a ransom payment. Additionally, attacks like these also have the potential to kind of reflect the above warning from the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. These attacks could increase in frequency and severity in response to Ukraine in both the food and agriculture sector as well as other critical infrastructure sectors, whether to disrupt operations, a retaliatory activity in order to take an economic toll. There's really a wide range, but this is kind of one good example of how these things could play out going forward here. I will pass it off now to Ross, who will provide an update on Ukraine.
Thanks, Cooper. So we're now into the third month of the war in Ukraine, and Russia has started its offensive in the Donbass region in the east. And the last couple of statements we've had from Vladimir Putin indicate that area is going to be the focus of the conflict moving forward. But we also had a Russian general state last week that the aim was not to just seize Donbass in the east, but actually to establish control over Ukraine's entire southern coastline, creating kind of a land bridge all the way to Transnistria, which is a breakaway area of Moldova, which is supported by Russia. That would actually leave Ukraine landlocked and then obviously weakened both economically and militarily. And one of the main reasons for Russia doing that is it's going to put it in a much stronger position when it actually comes to any kind of negotiations to end the conflict. And actually in 2014, when the conflict emerged in eastern Ukraine, that kind of tactic was talked about quite a lot. If you read back Russian think tank analysis from that time, you can really see that the Russian narrative on Ukraine hasn't changed since then. And that includes a lot of writing on how Ukraine actually threatens that Transnistria region. And so what we're actually seeing is a lot of parallels now with 2014. British military intelligence warned, I think it was today actually, that Russia is planning to stage a referendum in the occupied city of Kherson. That actually happened with Crimea and the breakaway regions back in 2014. So we're kind of seeing that playbook kind of repeat itself there. So it's a good way of kind of understanding some of Russia's tactics now by looking back at what happened then. And also in the Russian media, we've not really seen any particular change in the narrative and what they're doing. They're talking about things like 4 phases of the Ukrainian conflict. So that's destroying Ukrainian air defense system and testing the Western reaction to the Russian offensive, fully invading the Donbass region, including all port cities, then fully invading all of Ukraine, installing a pro-Russian government, and then denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine. Well, I'm not sure all of those things are within Russia's reach. We're not even sure that Russia actually has the military capability to take much territory at all from Ukraine in the east and the south. Russia claiming to have taken Mariupol, and it does appear to actually control most of that city. But there's still some Ukrainian forces holding out there at the steel plant where most of the fighting is taking place at the moment. So they can't kind of fully claim to have taken that yet, and they're generally just making very slow progress. We also had a statement from US President Biden last week saying that the US and NATO would never let Putin dominate and occupy all of Ukraine. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited Ukraine yesterday. That's the highest level visit by US officials since the war began. They announced the return of US diplomats to Ukraine, and we're also seeing some other countries recently announcing they'll return their embassy to Ukraine or to Kiev. So all of these things, the Russian statements and the diplomatic activity, do tell you something about the trajectory of the conflict. We're definitely going to see the escalation of fighting in the Donbass region. It's going to get pretty intense by all accounts. But because the war is becoming somewhat localized and concentrated to that area, it does actually kind of reduce the risk of a wider conflict at this stage. Although, we're still seeing those missile and air attacks in other areas of Ukraine, and they're likely to continue as well, but kind of a more broader conflict outside of Ukraine becoming a slightly lower risk, at least at this time. And we're also seeing, the protracted conflict still being the most likely scenario, with Russia really needing to make some significant advances to strengthen its negotiating position before any meaningful talks will take place. Because of the conflict, the IMF has cut its forecast for the global economy, blaming Ukraine conflict for pushing up inflation. We're also seeing some companies kind of blame Ukraine and inflation, Netflix in particular, saying that was the cause of the loss of subscribers, which had for the first time more than a decade, and Netflix predicting deeper losses ahead. And then Roman and Cooper have already briefed on the impacts of things like the cyber and food prices. Our last item today, shifting gears slightly, is about Disney having its special status removed in Florida. That status previously gave Disney significant tax advantages. It almost allowed the company to operate like a county government there. It controlled kind of everything, road maintenance, building projects. It also provided services, power, water, that kind of thing. And that decision was made in response to Disney's opposition to a new Florida state law, which limits the teaching of LGBTQ issues in schools, particularly children under the age of 9. Disney previously hadn't really said anything about that law, but came under a little bit of pressure because of that, and then released a statement saying it would suspend political donations in Florida, having previously donated millions of dollars there. The issue here highlights the risk for companies that are taking positions on political and social issues. We're in a situation where companies which have multiple stakeholders, so that includes, your consumers, clients, employees, shareholders, they all now expect companies to share their same values. And what this is actually doing is forcing companies to take a position on political and social issues. But when you do that, you will always upset someone. And so that increases the risk of punitive government action, or actually brings about kind of reputational issues, or even maybe direct activism or direct action against the company. And that's it from us today. We hope you enjoyed the content, and we'll see you again soon.